To the SEAL recruits, she was just the old lady in the corner, a civilian consultant with silver hair and gentle hands. They thought her job was to study them. They never imagined she was there to teach them a lesson. Naval Amphibious Base Coronado is a crucible, a place where the California sun beats down on black asphalt and forges the world's most elite warriors. It smells of salt, sweat, and discipline. Into this cauldron of raw, explosive masculinity walked Dr. Evelyn Reed. At 60 years old, she was an anomaly, a splash of soft gray in a world of sharp, olive drab. Her silver hair was tied back in a practical, no-nonsense bun, and the lines around her eyes spoke of a life filled with both laughter and intense focus. She was a civilian consultant, a kinesiologist hired to observe the brutal selection process and provide data on optimizing performance while minimizing career-ending injuries. To the candidates of Class 352, she was little more than a piece of furniture. She'd sit on a simple folding stool just outside the heart of the action, her gaze sweeping over the straining bodies. While instructors screamed and stopwatches ticked, Dr. Reed was an island of quiet concentration. She didn't use a tablet or a modern device. Instead, she made her notes with a fountain pen in a worn, leather-bound journal, her script small and impossibly precise. The recruits saw her as an academic, a relic from a different era, sent to analyze them like lab rats. Among the candidates, Petty Officer Jake Peterson, known as the Titan, was a force of nature. At 6'4" and 240 pounds of sculpted muscle, he was a former college football prodigy who carried himself with the unshakable arrogance of a man who had never met a physical challenge he couldn't dominate. He saw Dr. Reed's quiet presence as a mild, ignorable absurdity. He performed for the SEAL instructors, the men with scars and stripes on their sleeves, not for the old woman in the corner. He'd flex, letting the sun gleam on his ridiculously defined biceps after a set of pull-ups, his eyes scanning for the approval of the cadre, deliberately ignoring her station. One afternoon, during a brief water break, Peterson slumped down next to a fellow candidate, his chest heaving. He nodded his head dismissively in Evelyn's direction. "I still don't get it," he muttered, his voice a low rumble meant only for his classmate, but the wind carried it further. "What's a grandma going to tell us about pushing the limits? Her idea of an extreme sport is probably competitive birdwatching." His friend gave a nervous chuckle, but Peterson wasn't finished. "She looks at us like we're puzzles. We're not puzzles. We're weapons." Across the training ground, Dr. Evelyn Reed paused her writing. She didn't look up, didn't react. Her pen simply hovered over the page for a single, still moment before descending to make another small, precise note. She had heard every word. The first crack in the foundation of respect had appeared, and she knew, with the certainty of long experience, that it would only grow wider. The third week of training introduced the Forge. It was a deceptively simple name for a uniquely hellish evolution designed to melt away every ounce of a candidate's resolve. It involved hours of carrying heavy packs and zodiac boats under a relentless sun, a monotonous, soul-crushing exercise in pure endurance. For a man of Jake Peterson's size, it was a special kind of torture. His massive frame, an advantage in explosive strength, became an anchor in the marathon of pain. He had to burn more fuel, generate more heat, and fight harder than the smaller, leaner men just to keep pace. His pride, however, was even heavier than the boat on his head. Dr. Evelyn Reed watched from her usual position, her eyes missing nothing. She wasn't just observing their performance, she was reading their bodies like a text. She saw the subtle tremor in Peterson's legs, the dangerous, beet-red flush of his skin beneath his tan, the way his breathing was becoming shallow and rapid. These weren't the signs of exhaustion, they were the clinical precursors to heatstroke, a condition that could permanently derail a career, or worse. During a scheduled 5-minute halt, as candidates collapsed to the ground, gasping, Evelyn stood up. She walked calmly and directly toward Peterson, her worn boots making little sound on the sun-baked ground. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice even and professional. "I need you to stop. We need to check your vitals immediately." Peterson, who was trying to disguise his ragged breaths, looked up at her with open annoyance. "I'm fine, ma'am. Just catching my breath." He waved a dismissive hand, as if shooing away a fly. Evelyn didn't move. "Your skin coloration and respiration rate are concerning. This isn't a request." The public nature of the confrontation, the challenge to his perceived strength in front of his peers, lit a fuse in Peterson. His frustration at his own struggling performance boiled over, and he directed it all at the old woman standing before him. He pushed himself to his feet, towering over her, his expression a mask of contempt. "With all due respect, ma'am," he spat, weaponizing the honorific, "my grandmother knows her limits, and I know mine. I don't need a civilian analyst telling me if I can continue." A tense silence fell over the group. Every candidate knew Peterson had just leaped across a sacred line. It wasn't just disrespect, it was insubordination directed at someone who held medical authority over them. The air grew thick and still, the only sound the distant cry of gulls. Evelyn's calm expression didn't flicker. The storm had arrived. Dr. Reed's gaze remained locked on Peterson. Her voice, when she spoke, was devoid of emotion, yet it cut through the tension with the sharpness of surgical steel. "Mr. Peterson, my medical assessment of your condition is a direct order. You will stand down for evaluation, or you will be removed from this evolution for insubordination." Peterson's response was a short, ugly laugh. In his world, physical dominance was the ultimate trump card. He saw a frail, 60-year-old woman. He saw an easy victory. He took another step forward, deliberately invading her personal space, using his sheer size as a tool of intimidation. His shadow completely engulfed her. "And what are you going to do about it, ma'am?" he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Hit me with your clipboard." What happened next was a blur of motion so fluid and efficient it seemed to defy the laws of physics. It started not with a strike, but with an acceptance. As Peterson arrogantly reached out to shove her aside, Evelyn didn't block the hand. She met it, her own hand cupping his wrist gently, almost like a greeting. In the same instant, she stepped forward, not back, moving inside his reach. She pivoted on the ball of her left foot. It wasn't a move of strength, it was a move of pure mechanics, a lifetime of understanding leverage and balance distilled into a single, perfect motion. His own forward momentum, his 240 pounds of charging force, became the weapon she turned against him. The world seemed to tilt. Peterson's feet left the ground as he was guided in a flawless, shocking arc through the air. He was a giant, momentarily airborne, his expression of smug superiority frozen in a mask of disbelief. He impacted the hard-packed earth with a sound like a tree falling in a silent forest, a sickening, heavy thud that sent up a puff of dust. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. The training ground was utterly silent. 24 SEAL candidates and 2 hardened instructors stood frozen, staring. The Titan, the strongest man in their class, was flat on his back, his arm twisted in a submission hold at an angle that promised excruciating pain if he struggled. And holding him there, with one hand on his wrist and her body perfectly balanced, was the quiet old woman they had all dismissed. Evelyn leaned down slightly, her voice returning, as calm and clinical as if she were discussing a chart. "Mr. Peterson, my assessment is not a suggestion. Do you understand me now?" From the ground, gasping for the air that had been knocked from his lungs, Peterson could only manage one, choked word. "Yes." With the same controlled precision she'd used to put him down, Evelyn released the hold. She stepped back and her entire demeanor shifted. The warrior vanished, and the doctor returned. "Please remain on the ground, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice now filled with clinical concern. "You're exhibiting clear signs of dangerous heat stress. I need to treat you." As she knelt and began her medical work, checking his pulse and calling for a medical kit, Chief Petty Officer Williams, the lead instructor, walked over. His face, usually a granite mask of authority, was a complex mixture of astonishment, professional curiosity, and a flicker of deep respect. He watched for a moment as Evelyn expertly prepared an 4-line. "Dr. Reed," William said, his voice low. "Where in the hell did you learn to do that?" Evelyn didn't look up from her task, her hands steady as she swabbed Peterson's arm. "I've been around, Chief," she replied simply. "You pick things up." The understatement hung in the air, heavier than the humid heat. News of the incident spread through the command like wildfire. The story of the old lady consultant taking down a 240-pound SEAL candidate became an instant legend, whispered in the barracks and discussed in hushed tones by the instructors. But for the senior leadership, it was more than a shocking piece of gossip, it was a security and personnel puzzle that needed to be solved. The next morning, Evelyn was summoned to the office of Commander Stevens, the overall director of training. He was a man who dealt in facts and absolutes, and he did not like anomalies. When Evelyn entered, he was sitting behind a large oak desk. On it lay a single, thick file. "Dr. Reed, please, have a seat," he said, his tone formal. He gestured to the file. "I spent most of last night on a secure line with Langley trying to get your full service record declassified. This is what they sent." Evelyn glanced at the file. It was old, the cover stamped with faded warnings. Even from a distance, she could see the thick black lines of redaction that covered most of every page. Stevens leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Your official file says you are a highly respected kinesiologist with a PhD from Stanford. It says you've consulted for various government agencies. But this file," he tapped the blacked-out pages, "suggests a story that is vastly different. It has more black ink in it than text. I think it's time you tell me who I really have observing my men, Doctor." Dr. Reed sat perfectly still in the chair opposite the commander, her hands resting calmly in her lap. There was no defensiveness in her posture, only a quiet acceptance. She looked at Stevens, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Commander," she began, her voice retaining its usual placid tone, "my work in kinesiology isn't a fabrication. It's the culmination of my life's work. But my understanding of the human body wasn't just learned in a laboratory. It was learned in the field." Stevens waited, his silence a demand for more. "In 1979, Evelyn continued, I was recruited into a unit that, for all intents and purposes, did not exist. Officially, it was a special projects division within the CIA. We called it the Ghost Unit. Our mission was to provide deep cover support for special operations and intelligence assets in non-permissive environments during the Cold War." The commander's eyes widened slightly. He was familiar with the legends of such clandestine units, but they were spoken of as myths, not something one encountered in person. "We were a new breed," she explained. The agency realized they needed people who could operate autonomously, individuals who were cross-trained to be both high-level medics and fully capable combatants. They couldn't send in a green beret and a separate doctor. They needed one person who could be both. I was one of the first women selected for the program. She paused, letting the information settle. The training was comprehensive. We didn't just learn battlefield medicine, we helped write the doctrine for it under extreme duress. We mastered multiple martial arts, not for sport, but for survival. We learned how to keep a wounded operator alive with nothing but what we could carry, while simultaneously planning an exfiltration route under enemy observation. The file you have is blacked out because the missions we ran are still considered sensitive." Stevens leaned back in his chair, processing the revelation. This quiet, 60-year-old woman wasn't just a former field operative, she was a pioneer, a founding member of a legendary shadow community. He was looking at a living piece of special operations history. "Why did you leave?" he asked, his voice now tinged with awe. "I didn't leave the mission, Commander. I just changed how I served it," Evelyn replied. "I spent 20 years breaking bodies down and patching them back up. I saw too many good men end their careers early because of preventable injuries. I decided I could contribute more by studying the principles of longevity and resilience. I wanted to help warriors not just survive a mission, but survive a career." A new level of understanding dawned on Commander Stevens. He wasn't looking at a consultant he had hired. He was in the presence of a master. "Doctor," he said, his tone shifting entirely. "I believe your role here needs to be redefined. I'm no longer interested in your observations. I'm interested in your wisdom." Within a month, the announcement was made. Dr. Evelyn Reed's role was officially changed from passive observer to active program director. She was tasked with creating an entirely new curriculum, one unprecedented in naval special warfare, the Operator Longevity and Integrated Skills Program. It was a holistic approach designed to teach these elite athletes how to treat their bodies not as disposable weapons, but as systems that could be maintained for peak performance over a decades-long career. Her classes combined advanced physiology, injury prevention, tactical medicine, and the subtle principles of defensive tactics she had mastered over a lifetime. Her most dedicated student was Jake Peterson. The takedown had been more than a physical humiliation, it had been a fundamental shattering of his worldview. He had built his identity on the bedrock of his physical superiority, and a 60-year-old woman had demolished it in 2 seconds without breaking a sweat. Humbled and profoundly changed, he approached her new program with the zeal of a convert. He was always in the front row, his notebook filled with copious notes, his questions always thoughtful and respectful. One day, after a particularly grueling session on joint preservation techniques, he stayed behind. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you." Evelyn simply gave him a slight, knowing nod, a gesture of acceptance that was more powerful than any words. His arc was complete. The legend of Dr. Reed became a cornerstone of the Coronado culture. Recruits spoke of her in revered tones. She was proof that the most dangerous person on the battlefield wasn't always the one with the biggest muscles, but the one with the deepest knowledge. Her presence fundamentally altered the SEALs' understanding of strength, integrating the concepts of wisdom, sustainability, and respect for experience into their warrior ethos. Her methods were eventually adopted by other special operations commands, creating a new generation of operators who were not only more effective but also more resilient. Her legacy lived on in the men whose careers she extended and the lives that were saved because a medic, trained in her principles, knew exactly what to do in a crisis. She had proven that excellence knows no gender, no age, and no conventional boundaries. This incredible story reminds us that true capability often lies hidden beneath the surface, concealed by our own prejudices. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their age or appearance, only to be completely stunned by their abilities? Or perhaps you are the one who has been consistently underestimated. Share your story in the comments below. We believe every person's experience is valuable, and we ask that you please comment respectfully. And if you believe that true strength comes in many forms, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Your support allows us to continue bringing you these remarkable stories of hidden heroes. Thanks for watching.